Hi, everyone. This is Jan Kabili with episode 62 of the Photoshop Show. We have with us tonight a very special guest from lynda.com, and that's Scott Fegette. I'm going to say it wrong. Fegette, right, Scott?
That's great.
It sounds very French to me. Scott
It is.
Fegette.
Very much so.
Well, I'm so excited to have Scott here because Scott is the content marketing manager at lynda.com, and that is a really important thing because that means that he's bringing you guys out there samples and snippets and looks at the content, and there is so much that lynda.com is offering these days. And by the way, Scott used to be the product manager for Dreamweaver. How cool is that?
It was fun.
I'm sure it was fun. And you'll tell us, please, you're going to tell us more about it. We're going to find out everything. But before we do, we got to say hi to my co-host, Ron Clifford. Hi, Ron.
Hello, how are you doing? Good to be here tonight again. Yeah, episode 61, that's phenomenal, that's really fantastic.
No, 62.
Oh, 62, that's right. Well, actually, it is really 61. I think I missed episode 58.
Shh.
I think we have a gap in there. Don't tell anyone.
That's a lot of every other Tuesday nights. That's, what is that, 2 years? More than 2 years?
It's over 2 years, yeah.
Amazing. That is amazing. Well, it's always fun, and it doesn't, it seems like the time has just flown by. We've met so many interesting people, and I'm always happy to have on our panel our regulars, Erica Thornes. Hi, Erica. You're back from vacation.
Yep, 2 months traveling across country. Now I'm digging through all the photos and trying to figure out what to post.
Well, you sound so calm.
Take a day at a time.
There's nothing like a little vacation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although you went on vacation with how many children?
3 in a minivan across country for 2 months.
That sounds like a movie.
That's brave.
It was a good trip. It was something that we'll always remember, so it was worthwhile.
I'm sure you will, and I hope you shot a lot of great photos. Can't wait to see them. And then we also have our regular Dave Bell. Hi, Dave.
Hi there. It's great to be here again.
You been on any adventures?
Oh, I've been itching to get on an adventure. I've hardly touched my camera in a couple of weeks, but this weekend we'll be heading up to the Sierras. We've got a nice little cabin up at the 7,000-foot level, a lake up there, and we'll just be exploring around there. So I'm looking forward to exercising my shutter.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I don't know what that means, but no, that's great. And I'm coming to visit you because obviously, if you have a cabin in the mountains at the lake, you need visitors.
There's plenty of room.
Well, that's great. I'm so glad everybody's here. I just came out of the lynda.com's Boulder studio where I'm recording a course, and it's a good reason. It made me get up and come out into the sunshine. So I'm very excited and happy to have the show tonight. So I would like to know more from you, Scott. Tell us some stuff about you and your life, and all these exciting adventures you've had in the world.
Yeah.
That's a big question, right?
Yeah. Kids don't follow my career path. It's mostly been led by curiosity. I started out as a musician personally. I played music, was on touring bands for years. When I got out of college, I went to music school. Found myself needing some gainful employment. There happened to be a laptop on the tour bus that I was on, and someone had installed the 1.0 version of Photoshop. And I just got to sit around, basically cramp my back all day and play around with it a little bit. And it was really fun because in those days with Photoshop, those of you who had it, there was really nothing that we know of today in it at the time. Images were very limited in their color depth. There was no such thing as layers. You floated a selection and you dropped it right back down, and you were stuck with whatever you got when you did it. It was a pretty oppressive way to learn looking back on it now, but I think the coolest thing about it for me was it made me look at different parts of the program than most people would look at today when they jump into it. I have a very kind of different perspective on Photoshop just because I, again, mostly taught myself sitting on a bus without anyone to teach me. So the way I went about learning it was, I think, a little bit different than most people, probably a little more analytic than most people.
Well, then what happened? So after the bus...
Well, got off the road. I've reached a point where I just needed to learn more about photos and digital imaging in general. I'd been a photographer. I'd been to photojournalism on a photojournalism path for years. music was what I was doing at the time, but I found myself just kind of drawn into the things I could do with photos once I got them into Photoshop. So at the time, everyone was getting those AOL discs like crazy, and I, was using them for coasters around the apartment. And eventually, just stuck one in and fired it up, and I found this really cool chat room on there called MGR, Macintosh Graphics, and I started just talking with people there and asking questions, and met a just amazing group of people. Everyone from Lee Veris, Jeff Shiwi, Kai Kraus, who ended up hiring me about a year later.
Kai, do you guys remember him? You're too young.
Yeah, Kai's Power Tools. Yeah.
Kai's Power Tools. Wow.
Yeah, that was my first job in the software industry. But I basically just asked tons of questions. I was really curious. I also found that Photoshop was helping me pay the bills a little bit too. So I started doing flyers for other bands. I would do our own sort of leaflets, covers, CD jackets on the road. And with that version of 1.0 Photoshop, I was really pushing it a little bit further than it should have been. So by the time I came off the road and had a little bit of time to work with it, I found that I wasn't writing songs as much as I was tweaking images and finding people with scanners I could borrow, and better scanners I could borrow to get better images to work with. There were no digital cameras really of worth back then, unless you got a really big, expensive digital back, which very few people could. So yeah, I just was talking with Kai and Julie and Will Zach and all the people at HSC at the time, which became Meta Creations, Kai's Power Tools, and they offered me a job just to come down. And originally, I think what hooked me in was Kai had planned on doing this music project with a bunch of people like Thomas Dolby and Herbie Hancock, and I was really interested in getting in on that, but Photoshop already had me hooked. And pretty soon after I got there, I found myself, hanging out late nights with Kai, just playing with Photoshop, finding new ways of using it. And at the time, we didn't have layers. There were no such thing as layers. So a lot of the things that you take for granted today, like layer effects and just simple like ordering tricks that you can do with the layers, it wasn't there at all. You had to really plan everything out in advance. You were usually working in 4 or 5 different open image files at the same time and kind of copying between them into your master file. We were trying things there. Do you guys remember that app, Specular Collage? Really? Oh man. Now I'm really dating myself.
It can't be that long ago. There wasn't a computer,
Yeah, well, it was a short-lived program, I think, before Photoshop 3 that let you actually open up a PSD file and work with layers, and it was the most amazing thing. There were proxy layers. They weren't in really like full resolution, but you could at least move things around and do composites without having to, again, work with all these different image files, floating selections, dropping it, saving interim file versions. So after a little while of working with Kai, he kind of turned me on to the channels panel in a nutshell. At the time he called it Chops. He had these series of Word documents that he'd written and uploaded to America Online called Kai's Power Tips, 1 through like 2021. And it really just kind of dove into imaging from a completely different direction. I picked up Photoshop because I wanted to, do more graphic design projects and play with my photographs. But what he was doing was really interesting because he was all about the numbers underneath it. And he had the saying, happy chaos is what drives things. And, a little bit of it's sort of like, you push a creative idea in a direction, but some of the fun is seeing where it goes on its own once you did that. And the numbers were a really fun way of playing with it. So the way that he kind of taught me Photoshop was very much from channels up, looking at each individual color channel, kind of understanding how they interplayed. And since we didn't have layers and stuff at the time, we would have these insanely just long channels panels entries with all kinds of masks. We would just basically save selections that you would reload and use that to either paste inside or do little tricks to fake compositing at the time.
Well, that's really great because that means you really understand channels, and I don't think very many people do. So I'm really looking forward to you explaining that, in a simple way. I think some of the problem is that the people who do understand that really high-end stuff, they're thinking at this level that other people, it's just like talk going over your head. It'd be like, a physicist trying to explain some complicated concept to a non-scientist. So to the extent you can, we'll appreciate it. But before you do, I want to get to, so then how did you get to Adobe?
That was really sort of Meta Creations with Kai's company eventually kind of folded and turned more into an internet marketing company, moved to New York. Ironically, that building was right across the street here from lynda.com. And Macromedia snagged me up. I had been doing the MetaCreations website pretty much since they launched it. I found that was a lot of fun too. Let me kind of write code without having to be in the middle of the production pipeline in doing the Photoshop plugins. And I use Photoshop all the time for those projects, of course, too. And Macromedia pulled me up. I was part of the Dreamweaver team, joined them around Dreamweaver 1.2 as one of the managers on the team. Launched the exchanges. My main project when I first got up there was building the exchanges that we have now for all the products at Adobe, where you can upload your plugins, your presets, all the things that you have that go along with the program that really make it useful. And from there, things just kind of snowballed. I ended up, by the time I left, I was a senior product manager, and Dreamweaver was my product. Ton of fun. I really miss that team a lot. Now, it's really ironic that I spent over a decade at Macromedia and Adobe, yet never on the Photoshop team, which is why I'm kind of honored to be back here. It's like coming back to my roots in a way.
Oh, that's really great. Okay, so I'm sorry if this bored people, but I want to. Were you at the temple? What is it called? The temple in San Francisco, where there was a big conference, and Macromedia was on one side and Adobe on the other, and they were throwing the boxes to the crowd. Remember that?
I had just joined the company. I was not at that event. That was an odd, unfortunate event indeed. Yeah.
It was kind of fun. It was what was it? It was a lynda.com thing, right?
Well, yeah, I believe it was a lynda.com conference. I can't remember the exact conference. The gist of it was there was the two teams, the Go Live team on one side and the Dreamweaver team on the other. And if I recall correctly, someone's going to tell me I got this wrong, I'm sure. I can't remember who started it, but it was basically, hey, drop off your free copy of their product and we'll give you one of ours. And then people ended up just running back and forth, and it turned into this crazy melee, if I recall correctly. Yeah, that moment lived in infamy. Not one of our proudest moments as a product.
Okay, well, we shouldn't talk about it. I thought it was pretty fun.
Yeah, it definitely got some attention.
All right. Well, anyway, so you're at Adobe. You're working on the product management team. That's really, I'm just bowing down to you. That's so amazing. But now here you are at lynda.com. What are you doing there?
Well, content marketing. One of the things I found when I was at Adobe for all those years is that I liked the most was when I got to travel and teach. I was on the speaking circuit, mostly for web design, and spoke at most of those conferences, everything from South by Southwest to Event Apart, you name it. The thing I really liked the most about it was it gave me a chance to stop making a product, and I got to use it and show people how to use it. And that was one of the things I really liked doing at HSC, MetaTools, MetaCreations as well. As I got further and further into the product management team, I spent more of my time managing a product, and which eventually was developed between San Francisco, Bangalore, India, and Bucharest, Romania. So it just got a little bit hectic, and I found myself getting away from my roots, and it reached a point where I think right after CS6 launched, if I remember correctly, I ran into Michael Ninnis, who was formerly my colleague on the InDesign product management team. And he had gone back down to lynda.com and asked me what I was doing after the launch. And I said, I don't know. And, well, here we are. So it was perfect for me. At the time, they were looking for, someone to do content marketing who could help market what we do here at lynda.com, but also approached it more as a subject matter expert.
Okay, so now that you are there, and you obviously you know it from so many aspects, what can you tell people about lynda.com and what they can learn there and how to navigate it? And what's your message that you're trying to get out there?
We're about lifelong learning, and no matter what stage you're at in your path, I like to think that there's something there that will reach out to you. Most people kind of associate lynda.com with one topic too. It's funny, one of our authors, Morton, is a web design author. He teaches mostly WordPress courses, and lately he's been getting people coming up and saying, God, I love lynda.com, you guys are great, I wish you taught photography. It's like, but we do. And it's a lot of people come in for one topic and don't spend much time looking around, but I think that's what sort of blew me away about the company to begin with as well, was the breadth of content underneath the hood is truly amazing. For me, it was not so much about the skill you're after. So, say you want to be a better photographer. Of course, we've got courses that can teach you the mechanics of photography and, the exposure triangle and how to balance it appropriately and, what good composition looks like, all the way to the software stuff. But I think the strength of lynda.com is having all the other things too. It teaches you how to run the business of what you love to do. And kind of, really have that holistic, full view look at what you do for a passion, make it a living.
That's really cool. But, I mean, I of course know this, and that's why I devote so much time to it. I think it's the mission of that company is terrific, and it comes from the top down, from the wonderful Linda Weinman and her husband Bruce Haven. They started it. They're in there all the time. It's their vision. It's not just some corporate thing. So I really appreciate it, and I'm sure you do too. Is there anything we can look forward to? Something new coming that you can reveal, or anything like that?
I can't really reveal a whole lot. Oh man, see, this is much easier when I was a product manager and I had to think about a new release. I got a stand answer for that. What I can say is that if you've been on the lynda.com site for a while, you may have noticed in the last year or so, it's evolved quite a bit and rather rapidly. And I think that's a really common theme that you can expect to see going forward. For a long time, and I mean, as long as I've known Linda and Bruce, their hallmark has been the quality of the training. But there's just been an enormous effort here to really look at the experience around the training, not just what you're receiving, but how you're getting it. And, those other intangible things that really all factor into a good learning experience. Recently, we just launched course notes. So you can, for example, take notes right alongside, time-coded with the video as you watch, and get a transcript after the course, or roll back, if there's some questions you had, go through your notes and jump back to the spot in the movie where you left off. And then there's a lot more coming too. We've also, another thing we recently launched was the playlist center. So kind of like mixtapes. You can find, if you're interested in photography, you don't have to look through a huge volume of courses to find what you're looking for. We've got everything from how to properly retouch a photo to going out on the road and different outdoor settings with Ben Long. Douglas Kirkland photography series if you want to be inspired. And the playlists really help you kind of dive into a broader learning path around what you're interested in.
Well, that's great. I'm very, I love the place, and I have seen that there's so much more content now. So those kinds of tools like playlists, notes, and all of that can really help people find their way through the just huge amount of content and all the new courses as well.
Yeah.
But that having been said, we're very lucky to have you here live tonight. And so I was hoping that you would be able to share something with us, that a lot of our viewers may not know. You were going to talk about channels, right?
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about channels. When we were talking recently, I mentioned that was something I was interested in, and you kind of perked up. And I realized the more I've talked to people that channels really is kind of the forgotten panel in that little section. Everyone knows layers. A lot of people have used paths at this point because of the integration with Illustrator, but channels is kind of that red-headed stepchild, or R-headed stepchild, sort of sits over on the side. Mind if I share screen real quick?
Please. While he's doing that, you guys haven't said a peep because, as usual, I'm blabbing too much. Do you have anything you wanted to add or ask Scott before he goes into his screen share, or as he's going in?
No, I'm curious to see about the channels. I know we've had a couple of guests on that have talked about the channels panel. And used it for different reasons, but I'm, absolutely love learning any new thing, and I'm sure, like every show, I'm going to learn something I had no idea about.
Well, I feel like I'm kind of a Forrest Gump with Photoshop, but the things I know pretty well. So let me jump in. I'm just going to create a new image here that we can use for test. Say, give it a nice big image, make it RGB. Yeah, that's cool. So here we go. I'll just take something basic. Let's go ahead and fill this with white. Whoop, sorry. There we go. Okay. So channels. You see, I've got it up over here. So, raise your hand if this is the first time you've actually seen the channels panel open. Many people could probably say that. What you'll notice when you jump in is it's kind of confusing. There's an basically 4 channels that already exist in any color image in the RGB space, at least. There's RGB, which is a sum channel, kind of shows you the view that you're used to seeing, an actual view of your image. And then the individual color channels, red, green, blue. And there's nothing there right now, but let's, for example, I'll switch over really quickly to another image, maybe that has some different hues. Here we go. So, for example, this one, this is a great example. When we jump into each of the color channels, you can sort of take, much like, in an old, dark room, the colors, they had the red, the green, the blue bulb, and you expose them. This just sort of lets you break down the value of that light as it hits your virtual darkroom. So here's red, and as you can see where it's white, that's where things have kind of been protected in the old light world. There's a value for everything in grayscale. Yeah, every pixel is basically a value between 0 and 255. That's 256 shades of gray. Each of these color channels represents how much red is in this. If it's white, that's where it's all coming through. If it's blue, kind of black as it gets through the gray, that's where it's sort of blocking that color coming through, much like a mask or a selection. And it's essentially the sum of these that come together to form what you're after. Now, channels are pretty cool because you can use them in some cases. This is an image where there's tons of blue. And if you pop into the other channels, let's just kind of take a look at them one at a time. Because there's so much blue, the other channels are really pronounced. So, for example, if you wanted to start building a selection to cut something out and you had an image like this, you might want to start with maybe making a copy of this and using it as a selection mask. And then you can do some really cool tricks. So, for example, take red. I'm just going to duplicate it. Now it's essentially become a copy. When I jump back to RGB, I'll see it here like in quick mask mode, and it's actually exactly what quick mask mode is. If I was to take a brush here and just quickly swipe across it, you'll see it kind of looks like quick mask mode. Let me remove that right now. But what I've done is I've taken one of those color channels and I've essentially turned it into a selection mask. And from here you can do things, now that I'm just in this channel, I can actually change those values like an image, but instead of changing the entire image, it's really just going to affect the grays in this channel. So, for example, if I wanted to start pulling this into a little bit more of a mask, where are we at? Adjustments, levels. Levels is pretty fun because it's a way that you can really quickly squash a color range, or in this case, a value range. And what we want to do is try and get as much of that white with the black. As you can see, we're getting a pretty solid outline here. From here, it'd be kind of elementary to go in and maybe with a little quick hand painting and some magic wanding, you've got yourself a really fast selection that you can work with. And you just grabbed it from one of those color channels. Now, I mean, that's one way of looking at channels, is the constituent parts of an image. There's some interesting things. When Kai and I started playing around with channels, I shouldn't say Kai and I, it's basically anyone at Meta Creations. You're sort of steeped in Kai's channel philosophy. And he made us do a bunch of kind of interesting things just to sort of look at what channels really were. I'm just going to create 2 new alpha channels here and grab the gradient tool.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you. Sure. I will tell you, there are people out there who have no idea when you say alpha channel, what you're talking about.
Yes, I was going to. I was taking it off mic just to say, what's an alpha channel?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. So alpha channel basically is a selection. So for example,
how do you make it? How did it come on your screen?
How did it come on the screen? So there's a couple of ways. So right now, what I did in that example earlier is I just took one of these channels, the red channel, I copied it to a new channel. Right. And then it becomes essentially like a selection. So let me do what I just did really quickly. Sorry, I probably should have spent a little bit more time with that. Just kind of squash this a bit. Now, it's not perfect, but what I've done is I've started to really isolate the edge here to where if I wanted to load this as a thing, all you do is hold down the Command key, click that, and you've essentially loaded that as a selection. So when I pop back over here, you'll see that's exactly what we've got. It kind of took that grayscale value and applied it as a selection to this. Now, this is just taking the color channels. Alpha channels are essentially, that's what the channels are. Alpha is originally in the imaging spec, there's red, green, blue, and alpha was sort of this 4th channel that controlled transparency. And as you can see, that's exactly how we're using it right now. But it might be even more interesting if I kind of really showed you. So, for example, let's just look at these. I'm just going to do something really, really simple, like create a couple of overlapping boxes here, and I'm going to fill them very quickly with white. And we'll go ahead and load that you'll see exactly what happened is that's what you get. It's almost a perfect linear selection. If I was to kind of fill with this into my RGB channel, you'll see it's exactly, hide the edges, zoom in. It's a very perfect mask. And that's really what a selection is in the background. You're using the magic wand and stuff to essentially create a color channel like this that you then load back on, and it's telling the image these parts are transparent and these parts aren't. And when you cut something out, it does exactly.
How did you get the channel to show up on your, like, in your channels panel down there?
Oh, here, these ones I just created by kind of like a new layer. You can just create a new alpha channel. By default, it'll be the same size as the rest of the image. It's just another channel.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Let me go back and kind of step backwards, get rid of that, delete. There we go.
It's actually, I'm very glad that Eric is asking this, because here's what I was talking about earlier, Scott, is people understand this at your level. Don't even think about that other people are going, how do you create a channel? Where's the create channel button? So it might be helpful to include that as you go.
So this is the channels panel. I'll just pull it out really quickly.
Yeah, make it big so we can see it. That'd be good.
By default, it's just going to have your color channels and the summed RGB channel in it. When you create selections, so there's a number of ways you can do that too. For example, if you wanted to, let me just move this out of the way. Grab the wand tool and just do a really basic, something a little bit bigger. So I've just kind of created a basic magic wand selection here. So if you go to save selection, it's actually going to save it into the channel, into a new channel. We can say this is my wand selection. And boom, there you go. Now we actually have, if we take a look at that, it's like looking at quick mask without the rest of the image. In fact, that's exactly what it is. So there you've got that quick selection that we made with the magic wand. And that's really, when I'm saying that's what a channel is, that's what the selection is, kind of underneath the hood. This is how Photoshop sees the selection. It simply says, this is the area I'm interested in, and I'm not interested in any of that. So of course, we know that as more of this.
And how do we bring these into our layers panels if we want to use it as a mask?
So as a mask, it's really easy. Here's a great way of doing this. Let's say, let me just throw this one out and quickly deselect. Deselect. Here's a fun way of doing it. Okay, I'll just create this really quickly. Whoops, probably should. Is that white? Yep, cool. Now, it's interesting. Here's another thing with the text tool. When you use the text tool in a channel, a channel isn't a layer. So it does the old Photoshop 1.0 drop down. You type in the text, boom, it's pretty much a selection, and it is locked into your image. You can't get rid of it. Now it's also, as you see, I just typed in that right here into the channel, and it's now an active selection. But if it wasn't, all you have to do is flip over to the channel, and any of these selections you've saved will be entries, and you simply hold down Command on a Mac, click it, and you've loaded the selection. And at that point, you can do anything you would normally do with your selections. Kind of chop and grab, do all kinds of fun tricks. If you want to do that into a layer, of course, we just hop back over to the Layers panel. So for example, create a new layer, and you could just really quickly, I'll just hit Option Delete and fill it with the foreground color. And you've just created yourself a little bit of floating text. But you know that in the background, you've always got the selection if you want to come back to it. Now, channels, this is the part that kind of blew my mind when Kai started talking about it, was they aren't really just for, the power of them isn't just in selections. It's kind of what you can do with them when you start combining them and playing around with them.
Okay.
So the math is interesting. Yeah, now, as we talked about, every pixel in the image has 3 values, red, green, and blue, and they're of a value between 0 and 255. So behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of math. And if I want to really twist some brains, let me flip over here real quick. I've got a bunch of channels in this. Where's my channels panel? Here we go. Yanked it out. So I've got a few others here. So there's things I like to do, like say, for example, I wanted to take this and make it into an invitation or something. I want to put some text down in this bottom area, but I want to kind of pull it out. You could, create a selection. You could feather it a bunch of times and hope for the best, or you could just create a new channel. In this case, I'll just completely recreate what I did. I'll just grab the gradient tool and do something like that. In this case, sorry, let me just fill the whole thing and try it again. So here we go, and just create the gradient there, load it, and from here, then you can do all kinds of interesting things. So actually, let me do it on the background here. Be all nice and destructive. This is how we used to roll. Everything got changed every time. So let's pull up, for example, levels, and I could go ahead and kind of blow out the top. In this case, I want to, hold on, cancel this. Sorry, I'm getting a little crazy on myself. Let me invert the selection real quick. And let's try that one more time. Oh, got to go back down to my background layer. Sorry, folks. Remember, Forrest Gump. Here we go. So now you can kind of take that and kind of get a little bit more of a selective washout down at the bottom if you wanted.
Okay, so can you explain what's happening then for people? Bottom of what? What's happening? Why is it happening like that?
So we're used to this. If I was just to create a normal selection, it's a very hard edge selection. Say I wanted to do something like ghost this out a little bit, and so I could place some text in this area in a desktop, publishing app of some sort. And I'd normally do this, come up to adjustments, levels, and then, wash it out a little bit, maybe do some blurs in this area. But these are pretty boring selections. The other things you can do is you can come in and, for example, feather your selection. And what this does is it smooths it around the edge. But you've still got this kind of really hard to read marching ants is what Kai used to call them. The, sort of the dotted line that marches around your selection area. You'll see if I zoom in, it's got a curved edge, but you can't really see what the selection's doing until you go ahead, and I'm going to save this selection to my channels panel. Let's see. Call feathered selection, and let's take a look at it. And now you can really get an idea of what's being affected with your selection. So why would you want to do a feathered selection? You might want, a little bit of a smoother transition instead of that hard edge. That's usually the one way of doing it. But if you're doing it with just your feathering controls, you never really get to see what you're doing. If you do it over here in the channels, you can now say, okay, yeah, that looks kind of good, but what I really want is something a little wider. So let's go in here too and throw a Gaussian blur on this and really tweak it out a bit more. Here we go. Now I've got a really big blurry edge. If I was to load this selection, come back to my background area, and then do the same levels trick.
Yeah, what's not clear in this mode is that you hit the selection, the one selection in the channel, and then go back to your RGB, but you don't see that selected anymore in the panel, even though it's the
correct. Yeah, and yeah, and you can actually do that with layers too. The transparency in a layer, you can just sort of control click or command click the layer, and it will kind of look at the transparent areas of your layer and load that as a selection too.
Clicking that's the channel.
Yeah. Yep, that's just it. And once you've created those selections, you can create as many as you want. For example, let's create, maybe another sort of semi-contiguous one, and we'll, go ahead and feather the heck out of this one, make it really, really wide, 50 pixel feathering. And I'll go ahead and save this one, and we can take a look at sort of how that looks on the back end too.
So I wanted to ask you if I'm thinking about this correctly. This is how I teach people. I want to make sure it's right. That there are color channels, but then there also are these other kind of channels called alpha channels. Yeah. And basically what an alpha channel is just another way to represent a selection. It is said under the hood, the way that Photoshop sees a selection. The way we think of them normally, the marching ants, is just a
visual representation.
Visual representation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the power of these are you really get to see what your selection's doing, but not just see a selection you've made. You can now get in and anything you can draw. I mean, that's the quick mask analogy. You know, I think we're all familiar with, you know, just hopping into quick mask mode and then really quickly drawing a selection in.
I don't think we're all familiar with that.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's the topic. That's a topic for another time then. In a nutshell, what it does is Quick Mask kind of gives you almost a Rubylith overlay, a red overlay that you paint in to sort of simulate a selection. And it's just another way of graphically looking at these alpha channels behind the scenes. So just to give you a little peek at some of the power, this is, I mean, Kai really got into fun stuff like this. I've just typed some text into another alpha channel here. I'm going to create another version of this here. He used to call this the marching ants. Theory. So I'm going to also load this as a selection, and I'm going to put white.
Use layer masks.
So you can use layer masks, but this is, when you see the effect I'm going for here, it's a little bit different. So this is how we used to do graphic design back in the day, is we would hold down the Option and Command key with the selection active and with white as our background color. And then to create 3D text, we would kind of alternate between the right or the down and the left arrow, for example. Call this driving the pixel bus. Kind of drive this little guy down like that, and then hit Option Delete, which fills with foreground color, and you've just created yourself essentially 3D text background. And if I was to come in here, for example, and you know, you can say just fill this even with foreground, you've got the beginning of some text. Then go ahead and load the clean text one more time. Oops. Sorry, I got that a little bit out. This is where I really do have to lean on one of Photoshop's newer features, which is the ability to actually move a selection. Let's come in here. So you can kind of drive the selection right down into place and drop another color into it. Of course, Illustrator made all this stuff super, super easy, but you know, back in the day, we had to use whatever we had on hand to try and pull off these effects. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. So, you know, for example, there's a quick stupid effect. Funny thing is the differences in the pixels actually gives it almost a little shaded effect too when you pull it out. So it's kind of a fun way to work. But this is just a quick and dirty way to use an alpha channel to create an interesting effect. Another one that Kai used to do is he would take a normal shape and he would blur things and move it two ways. So this is the same text. It's blurred by about 3 to 4 pixels, and that's just filter, blur, Gaussian blur at about like 3 pixels. And then he just selects the whole thing and uses the arrow keys again to move this whole image kind of up and to the left a few pixels. Then does exactly the same thing with another copy and moves it down. Now, this is the part that totally blew my mind. There's this other incredibly unused box called calculations, and this is where the fun of channels really pops out, is now you can actually take 2 different channels in an image, and it can be the color channels if you want, but it can also be the ones you've created, and you compare them to each other with different operators. In this case, I'm just going to do a subtract. Everything disappeared because I basically subtracted a channel from itself, which means it's kind of whoop, boom, everything disappears. It's like a black hole. What I'm going to do here is switch it to blur up, and now what it's done is it's taken the difference between those two, which makes almost a perfect little kind of soft edge bevel on the outsides. And you can now, the result of this calculation, you can also send to a new channel. So I'm just going to send it over here. Boom, we've got a new alpha channel with this cool little thing here. And if I was to pop back up and say load that alpha channel, and we'll just move it up a little bit differently, or even better, let's just kind of drop it right down here with the rest of those. You can start bringing in dimension. So this is one's on the top. Let's just consider this a highlight. It's on top of everything else. I'm going to Command H to hide my layers, or hide my marching ants, and bring up my old favorites, the levels control. And from here, you know, it should, knock wood, you can barely see that. But if we get a little closer, I'm going to zoom in here too. Whoop. There we go. You can see it starting to give it a nice little kind of soft highlight edge. So this is how we would create dimensional stuff back then, and you'd basically do exactly the same thing with in the opposite direction to create the shadow side of it too. So I'll go back to calculations, choose blur down and blur up. Whoops, got to do that the other way around. Blur up and then blur down.
Can I stop you right there?
Yep.
I doubt many people know much about the calculations box. When you say I'm choosing this, you're choosing that. What are you doing? Can you say
let me step you through. So what this is you can have two different images and compare the channels between them, but in this case we're using the same source image to compare. It's looking at which layer am I on, and this is just the merge layers. Since I'm in the channels panel, it's just looking at the RGB channel at the moment, so it's kind of taking everything. And out of that, I'm using the blur up channel for source 1, blur down, and what it's doing is it's subtracting 1 from 2. And so everything that was white, dark in channel 1 gets subtracted from channel 2, and what that gives you is, with those two offset channels, you can start creating dimension out of a simple shape. So this is how we would do these tricks, is kind of use calculations as a way to fool Photoshop into giving you a highlight and a shadow, for example.
And then down in the result box, you've chosen for that calculation to result in yet a third channel, correct?
Right, yeah. So, and then when I hit OK, it'll just create a new channel with this result in it, or I could create a new document. That's how we used to do it back in the day, is create a new document, and then you'd have a bunch of open documents you'd be kind of pulling from to create this before layers and, well, before there was more RAM. Or you could just send it directly as a selection, and it'll literally just have the selection active. You switch back to your RGB channel and use the selection the way you want to. I always personally save it as a new channel in the same document, and boom, there you go. So Alpha 3, we'll go ahead and load that as a selection also by command clicking on it. I'll go back to the RGB channel. Sorry, I got these all offset. That was one of the problems with channels, is you always had to have everything aligned just so to make it work right. I'm going to zoom in to make sure this is aligned correctly, or at least kind of correctly. And here I'll bring up levels again. Command L is my shortcut for that, and then drag everything the other way. Let me hide edges on my, hold on just a sec. There we go. Layers. So that, if I pull this down, what this is doing is kind of taking and expanding my white range to more of the darker pixels. So it's like, this is the darkest pixels in my image. This part of the graph are the lightest pixels in my image. And I'm saying, yeah, take everything that's light and push it as hard as you can, or push that point down to where more and more is light. I want to go the opposite way this time. I'm going to pull everything over to the other direction. And that will do exactly the opposite and start to give you a little bit of a relief. And so there you go. If I zoom in a little bit more, you can see now you're starting to get, kind of those smooth curves that, well, if we had a slightly better 3D effect, this wouldn't look quite as gaudy, but it's kind of how we did it back then. It was all in channels, and you had to just drop it like I'm doing right onto your background. So if things went wrong, you kind of had to go grab an original copy of the image, drop it back in as your main image, but fortunately you'd have all of these steps saved along the way, so you could just kind of, click in, create your new selection, and start over and try again. What it meant is that there was a lot of trial and error back then, and you saved tons of intermediate steps for everything. But this is some of the fun of channels. If you like use selections, it really kind of behooves you to try and play around with this a little bit. It's a great way for you to visualize exactly what's happening with your selections, and if you use them a lot to either kind of change values, so make certain areas of your image lighter or darker, this is a really powerful way to create them and fine-tune them to exactly what you want. Helpful?
Cool. So that's really neat. It works great on 3D text. Now my question is, what does it do for photographers? And I think you just
yeah. Actually, here's a great example. Unfortunately, I don't have the source channels here, but I can talk you through exactly what they were. This is one where I took this picture of my wife and son at the Santa Barbara Zoo. And it was cool, but it was a little kind of, I wanted to give it a little bit more of a color effect, and I really wanted to kind of highlight this swash of light that went through here and expanded a little bit. So I created, essentially by using a gradient as a new channel, I drug it both ways to where we had black here, and then it slowly got white through this middle and then curved back to black further down here. And this is, whoops, let me find the other one. And this is kind of the end result. It gave me a really much broader like light area that I could pull out, but I could use that gradient to kind of really make it natural. It wasn't just this stripe across the middle of my image. It was a nice, big, smooth, gradiated sort of beam of light I cast on this part of the image with the gradient that helped bring it out, and then a little bit of color shifts sort of gave it the rest of the effect I was after. Another thing I do with them all the time is this is a picture of my son at the beach. And it was kind of cool, and he was watching the Harry Potter movies when we saw this, so I thought it'd be really neat to, I don't know, give him his own magic trick. So by simply going in and using a bunch of sort of warp effects and gradient effects as a channel and then loading them as selections, I was able to turn it into this.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that is, basically a bunch of essentially flame fractals. So are you familiar with fractals, mathematic art? It's a way of kind of generating nice pseudo-random shapes, but I used them to kind of generate the shapes that I then pasted in as channels. And then I loaded the channels as selections. There was probably about 20 of them that overlapped to create the bits of the smoke and the kind of halo effect around the, I don't know what as is, the magic beam. And just kind of built the effect up over time. And then the final trick was, you'll see how the sand is kind of washed out here and here, but it's got a nice halo effect around it. That was just another one where I kind of made a new black channel and took a white sort of circular gradient, drug it out through the middle to where it kind of was around this area, then loaded it as a selection and then selectively lightened it to give it a little bit more of a vignette effect. So those are some creative things you can do with it. Of course, you can do really gaudy stuff like this in 3D text, but it's not so much fun. God, what was I doing with that? That is one of my Halloween outfits. What do you think? Cool. Yeah. And yeah, this is another one that honestly, if I was really, really plucky right now, I'd jump into what I was planning on doing anyway. And let's see. What is going on here?
Is there a
selection?
My gradient tool is being very, very bad right now.
Well, that's kind of being figured out. There's a lot of people recently using the channels panel in a really powerful way, using what is being called luminosity masking, where it isolates value ranges so that you could work on landscapes in very specific value zones using the channels panel.
Absolutely.
And that's become very popular now. It's something actually I was working on today, was developing, instead of using plugins, I was just doing my own luminosity masks. And once you get the hang of it, it's actually pretty easy. Yeah,
it's great. And again, if you just kind of take a look at the constituent channels in any image, I'll just turn all these off and look at blue. There's usually one of them that kind of has some really, really stark contrast to it. This is a great one where you're starting to see some areas around here. You look for the ones that really bring out the relief, and you can immediately begin loading these individual ones into the RGB channel. So now we're taking those kind of shifted, in this case the red shifted stuff. I'll hide this. Again, let's see what happens when you use that. Whoa. It actually, in this case, it's kind of healing some of the color shifts I made. We've compressed it a bit, but it's also doing it very selectively, essentially using the red values as a filter. So when I kind of compress everything together, you notice those reds pop right back into the image.
I like that.
Yeah, there's so many different ways you can use channels. The way to really think of it is any black and white grayscale image is potentially a channel, whether it's a shape you want to overlay on what you're doing, whether it's a mask that was made particularly for the photo you're working with. In some cases, case of the color channels here, taken directly from the image you're working with. But you can use these selections in some pretty amazing ways to kind of push and pull your image, in ways you hadn't thought of.
So what would be an example, Ron, of luminosity masking in this image, for example? Can you say what you're talking about there?
Yeah, without having the image in Photoshop right here, I could control click, and it would the initial selection would probably, if I was on RGB, would pick up all just the highlights. It would create as you see there in the above portion.
Can you click back on it? Click on Scott so we can see it, because we just right now.
Yeah, I am on Scott. You're seeing me because I'm talking. But
yeah. Okay.
And so what we're seeing is just the highest values of this image have been selected. So if he was to create an alpha channel from this selection, he would just have a mask for the highlight values.
Yep.
So if you just clicked on your create a channel from that, an alpha channel.
There we go. Let's take a look at it.
It'll
and there
pop,
we go.
And there, it's creating a grayscale image with the highlight value selected.
And then what?
So this is really fun. You can actually do things to sort of push this. So say you want to really accentuate the super highlights. By pulling up your black point, you can actually trim out everything that's below a certain level, so that now you're really just selecting, when you load this, the super white light values, and it lets you take those highlights and just really pop them.
Yeah.
That's another awesome way to use channels.
Can I see? Wait, I want to see. So okay.
Oh yeah, no problem. Here, let me pull that in right now. So I'll hide this. What we did is essentially I created this sum channel, which is a perfect grayscale representation of the image, which, as Ron said, is perfect at telling you exactly what the highlights and the shadows are. Then I'm just going to bring up, let's see. Oh, it does this occasionally. Hold on. I'm still on the sum channel. Here we go. Levels. So in this case, pull that, and you see it's really just getting the highlights. But in this case, it's still the full image. Let's do what I was showing you a second ago. I'm going to go ahead and, actually cancel, deselect. I don't know if you saw that. When I had the levels up, it was like everything was chopped off halfway down. It's because the luminosity mask, as Ron had defined it, was still active. Let me take that off. I'm going to use the levels. And again, we're just going to push the low end, completely blow it out. So what that's doing is saying anything below a certain value in the image, just don't even affect it at all. And we can get it to a point, if you fine tune it, where it's really just the super, super highlights. If you want to be really funny, you can kind of like push the highlights a little bit more contrasty by bringing down the white point, and get yourself to a point where you've got a nice kind of good, like serious highlight mask. Then we're going to load that one, go back over to RGB. I'm going to hide the, see, is it going to be nice to me now? Sometimes it's not hiding my selection like I like it to. There we go. And from here, now it's going to be much more drastic on just the highlights. So it won't get as much of that lower end stuff, but you can see we're blowing out the waves almost immediately. And if, again, you can take that, now that you've got as a channel, some channel, I can see that it's definitely bringing up, for example, some areas around in my son's cheek. Let me kind of zoom up here too. Sorry for the graininess. As I play that, you can see it really kind of gets, there's a point where it starts to lose the highlight, but you can really pull it out. And there you go. That looks kind of nice. I might just want to apply that right away. Some other things you can do too is, after taking a look at those changes, sort of cancel in levels and come back over here and say, I just want to affect the stuff here, and I might just go in and literally paint black this entire upper area and just get the highlights in the foreground. But that's the cool thing about channels, is you're treating a selection almost like something you're painting too, and you can be incredibly detailed with your selections.
So Ron, when you're talking about luminosity masking, you're just talking about loading the highlights as a mask,
Yep.
as a channel mask. Is that the idea?
Well,
something else?
In this case, yes, it's the highlights, but you can create a set of luminosity masks that go from the very highest highlight right through stages to the very deepest shadow, so you can isolate very specific tonal values and then bring that mask over to your layers and apply any adjustment you want to it.
Yeah. Here's another, exactly what he was just saying. Let me kind of hop over here for a sec. Let's go the other way. I'll kind of remove this all, and let's pull the whites down. So you can see how now I'm just, the stuff that's showing is just the shadows. And here's the little trick. So now that you've got that done, let's go here, hit Command-I, flip the whole thing over, and now you've just selected.
And now you have a mask just for the shadows.
Now it's just the shadows. So if I hide this again, let's go ahead and hit Command-H, Command-L to bring up the levels. I can pull that black point, and you see how it's only selectively shading out my shadows. So that's another great trick.
It's very powerful, especially for landscape. People that do a lot of landscape work, this is a very powerful tool for them.
Very much so.
So to reiterate, the way you did that was you selected the highlights, then you inverted the channel that you created from the highlights so that you then had a channel of of shadows.
Yeah, I'll do it again right now. I just here I save the selection, create another new selection. I often have zillions of alphas. Now using the adjustments levels. Now you can kind of push it. Basically, you want to get it to where the only stuff that's visible is what you're interested in, whether it's dark or light. And in this case, we want to go the opposite direction. We want to blow out all the highlights until we just have those shadows remaining. And you may even want to bring this up a little bit and make it, again, this makes it more contrasty, makes the blacker or the darker grays more black, and it makes it much more harsh and stark. Once that's done, now this in selection speak means that pretty much everything's selected except for the shadow. So all you have to do is hit Command-I, which is up here, and select, oh gosh, yeah, it's usually inverse, but I probably don't have the selection anymore. Just gonna hit that. Command-I flips the image around, so now again the dark areas are not affected, the white areas are, and that means that when we load this, it's just those shadows.
That's really cool, and that's what luminosity masking is in your book, Ron?
In its essence, that's what it is being able to isolate specific value ranges and then use that as a layers mask in the layers panel and apply any adjustment you want within just that value range.
Yeah.
So Erica, does that kind of answer the question you were asking at the beginning? You kept saying, well, why can't I just use layer mask? Why not layer mask? You see how they work together? That you channel to make the selection that you then put on the layer mask.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you can paint into a layer mask easily too, but it's basically doing exactly the same thing. I just like to use the channels. To me, that's all I had when I started, so I always fall back on it. Is that helpful? Oh my gosh, it's 7 o'clock. Time does fly. Wow.
Amazing how fast it goes, isn't it?
It is. Here, let me get a camera back.
Well, I think that's totally helpful because, as Ron said, this is like, I don't know what they call it, a meme or something. Everybody's running around going, luminosity mask, luminosity mask. But I don't think there are very many people who understand what they're doing. Maybe they can do the steps, but now they're going to understand what and why they're doing that. So that's great information for people.
Yeah, honestly, to me, the cool two tools to know is the channels panel and levels. Sorry, when you have those two, you can pretty much squeeze any grayscale channel to any range you want it to, just like I was showing you by pulling either the white point or the black point towards the other.
And this all comes back to, we had Claudia McHugh on a while back, and she helped us understand how the channels panels could also do this when she showed us an example of isolating a dandelion fuzzball out of a background. Using the channels panel and levels, which is far more powerful than trying to do it with certain selections.
And for the selection channels, you could use curves instead of levels, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Curves is a really organic way to kind of push and tweak those values, kind of stretch them towards one side or the other, and in some cases completely invert them. For me, I kind of got stuck on levels because it was just a little bit more intuitive. The histogram was right there. I could really see my values. At first, curves was kind of very confusing for me. It didn't make much sense, but once I sat and thought about it for a while, over time it's become a little bit more comfortable.
I wanted to say, Ron, if anybody's interested in that exercise of the dandelion, like using one of the color channels as an alpha channel in order to make a selection of a complicated soft edge. That's what that is.
Yeah.
I actually, I reiterated that whole exercise in that book. I just wrote this thing. I'm not trying to call the book, but if you need it in writing, this Lightroom and Photoshop classroom in the book, I did it with this crazy picture. I don't know if you can see it. It's a dog with really crazy looking fur, And I just found one of the channels where that was really obvious and did that. And that's a very simple example of what Scott's doing.
Yeah, and as long as you find one of those channels that has that outline really clear, you can then go in and use levels to choke it to that outline as closely as possible. A little bit of touch-up, and you've got a selection a lot faster than you'd have if you did it in Quick Mask or you tried to use a wand or something.
So here's what I think is weird. If it's so not that hard to do, if you can get back to the channels, how come the engineers can't figure out a way to translate that into semi-automatic for human beings, who can't not human beings.
I never totally understood that, honestly. I think they've gotten close with some of the like the keying and background removal stuff that sort of tries to make auto selections. The color range filter is another great one where I use that all the time. I mean, that's a super handy one. It essentially does a lot of what I would do in a channel anyway, letting you kind of choke the ranges and find that edge and fine tune it really quickly. I'm not sure why. I know that it felt to me that once the layers panel ended up in Photoshop, that's where all the attention went, and I can't deny that. I missed a layers panel until version 3. I really was ready for it when it showed up. But then things like layer effects popped up, so you didn't have to really create an alpha channel and offset it and blur it and chop it out to make a drop shadow. You just added a drop shadow. And I think once things became that easy, you didn't have to go in and do this, but to me that was kind of a bummer because you lost the real power of the channels panel in the mix. And you can see there's some really cool things you can do with it.
One of the things that I notice as someone who teaches from Photoshop and teaches photography in general is that there's a disconnect. I mean, there's a whole generation of people like you and Jen and David Biedny's in our audience tonight, and Claudia McHugh, that have a foundational understanding of the background of what all these new tools do, what we consider new tools like the effects panel, and like even layers is to some people still fairly new, but I won't mention any names, but what's happening is we have a whole generation of people that don't know what's going on, don't understand that there's 256 levels of gray on each color channel that is in transparency creating a color image. It would be great if we could encourage people to dive in and learn those things, but for most people, they just want to get the job done. They don't want to learn that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of math involved, and honestly, I can't say that I just sort of lay back on layer effects these days myself too. It's easy. It makes things really simple, and a lot of times that's why you got a tool in the first place, was to get something done. But that said, I think definitely just sort of understanding the building blocks of what goes into a digital image is a real help, and where it comes out and saving time or creating those selections, and you know how it can be when you need to create that perfect selection that is just eluding you. This is just another trick in the tool belt to help get closer.
That's right, and you're perfectly right. It's when we start making complicated selections that don't have those perfect backgrounds. I've often do 2, 3, 4, 5 different methods to create a complicated mask. Yeah,
well, the reason the calculations panel was originally created was because people wouldn't be able to get a single selection out of one mask. One area might have background that was really easy to cut out, but the other might be really difficult. So they would actually section the image off into 3 or 4 different areas and mask the subject separately in each one, and then use the calculations to sort of sum them all up and create a final mask. Mm-hmm. But again, that's another little bit of Photoshop arcana that's kind of lost nowadays.
I don't think it is arcana. I think Ron's right, and that it is very relevant.
Yeah.
But in that, if you understand this stuff, then you can really use Photoshop to your advantage.
Yeah.
If you don't understand it, you're limited to just pushing buttons and hoping. And however, I know that there aren't very many people who want to take the time to learn this sort of thing. And I wonder, I mean, what do you think, Ron? You're out there teaching. Do you think people need to understand this? Or do you think it is arcane and they should just go and figure out, how to use the tools without understanding them that much?
I think it's like anything else. I can go out and I can buy a consumer DSLR and I can shoot with it tomorrow and produce pretty good results. But I can't take control of what I'm doing in a genuinely artistic way without understanding how that camera works, without getting behind and knowing how it works. And it's the same with Photoshop or any other post-processing software that we're using until we get beyond the facade of that user interface, which I guess Photoshop has really done us a favor by making it complicated, so that we dive into it a little more. But it's not until we get to that level where we have to go beyond just what comes out of the box to arrive at our vision. And we'll never get there if we don't go a little deeper.
I totally agree.
I want to see what Erica thinks, because she's going to leave, she's telling us.
Yeah.
You're a practicing photographer. What do you think?
I think it's amazing to learn the history of it. I think I learned a ton on this show. It was amazing because it's like, I knew it was difficult back then, but I didn't know how difficult it was. So I loved having the foundation and the history of it. I'm just realizing I really kind of like some of my tools I'm using now.
They're nice.
Yeah, but yeah, so it was really cool. I think that for people who really love to dig in, I think it's important. But for the general person, I think just learning the surface works. Adobe's made the product so many different ways that you can use 10% of the program and get, as Ron said, pretty decent results. And I think that's a major plus to Adobe. But that's what lynda.com's for. That's what shows like this are for, to really dive in when people really want to know more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really handy to know all this stuff too, but there are tons of photographers who take great pictures and never stepped into a darkroom. So
Yeah.
the eye ultimately is what wins the day. And if you create it either through the lens or digitally, it doesn't matter as long as it shows up.
Yeah. Well, I've got to skedaddle. It's kids' first day of school tomorrow, so I got to get them ready for bed. So take care and thank you. It was wonderful meeting you.
Great to meet you too, Erica.
We'll see you, Erica.
Well, thank you, Scott, and I hope I didn't interrupt you too much, but I know I was trying to make sure that everybody understood.
No, thank you. It's kind of hard to tell if this is like going up over or going under. It's pretty heady stuff at times.
It is, but boy, I learned a lot. That was really good. And I finally figured out what Ron's always talking about when he says luminosity masking.
Yeah. I didn't know it was a thing again now. That's awesome. It's like, wow. I guess they say you wait long enough and anything out of style comes back in again. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I know it's getting late there, and you probably want to go home, don't you? You're still at work, aren't you?
Yeah. I like to work, though. So.
Is that lynda.com? Turn around and show us what are we looking at there?
Yeah. Oh, this is our upstairs. This is the creative area. See my Photoshop and InDesign pillows over here.
Yeah, I noticed those.
Yeah, we've got our Lego wall over here in case you want to be creative. So we like to foster creativity, that's for sure. I'm upstairs at HQ. Linda's office is right over there.
Nice. All right, then. Does anybody have anything else for Scott? We're good?
No, just thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge about what goes on behind the scenes in Photoshop and helping us understand more about the channels panel, which is becoming one of my favorite places to dive into. So,
awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I started with Photoshop. It's kind of awesome to be a guest.
You were great. We appreciate it. Okay, hang out there to talk to us for just a moment, and otherwise we're going to say goodnight to everybody, and thank you for joining us yet again for the Photoshop show.
Good night. See you later.
Yeah.